Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there lived a kind and beautiful girl named Ella. After her beloved mother passed away, her father remarried a woman who was as proud and cruel as she was vain. This new stepmother had 2 daughters of her own, and together they turned Ella's life into a living nightmare. They stripped her of her fine clothes, forced her into rags, and made her the family servant. From dawn until dusk, Ella scrubbed floors, washed mountains of laundry, and cooked every meal. Her only place of rest was by the warm fireplace, and the ashes that clung to her clothes and face earned her the cruel nickname, Cinderella. Despite the constant mistreatment, Cinderella's spirit remained unbroken. She was always gentle, patient, and kind, finding comfort in the friendship of the little mice who lived in the attic and the birds that sang outside her window. She never complained, holding on to the memory of her mother's words, "Have courage and be kind." One day, a royal proclamation swept through the kingdom, causing a flurry of excitement. The king was hosting a magnificent 3-day festival, culminating in a grand ball, so that his son, the prince, could find a bride. Every eligible young woman in the land was invited. Cinderella's stepsisters could barely contain their glee. They spent weeks preening and preparing, ordering new gowns, ribbons, and jewels. And who had to help them get ready? Cinderella, of course. She styled their hair, ironed their dresses, and listened to their endless chatter about dancing with the prince, all while a quiet sadness bloomed in her heart. On the night of the first ball, as her stepmother and stepsisters swept out of the door in a whirlwind of silk and perfume, they cast one last sneer at Cinderella. "A shame you can't come," one of them mocked. "The cinders might stain the palace floors." The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Cinderella all alone, silhouetted by the dim light of the fire. The weight of her loneliness finally became too much to bear. She sank to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and began to weep. "Oh, how I wish I could go to the ball," she whispered between sobs. Just as her tears were about to extinguish the last embers in the hearth, a soft, shimmering light began to fill the room. Cinderella looked up, her eyes wide with wonder, to see a woman with a kind face and sparkling eyes standing before her. "Don't cry, my dear child," the woman said, her voice as warm as a summer breeze. "I am your fairy godmother, and I'm here to help." Cinderella could hardly believe her eyes, but ... how? She stammered. "I have nothing but these rags to wear." Her godmother simply smiled and raised a glittering magic wand. "Nonsense. We just need a little bit of magic. First, go to the garden and bring me the largest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella hurried to do as she was told. With a tap of the wand and a few magic words, the pumpkin swelled and transformed into a magnificent, gleaming golden carriage. Cinderella gasped in awe. "But what about the horses?" she asked. Her godmother pointed to a little mouse trap. With another flick of her wand, 6 grey mice turned into 6 splendid white horses. And a whiskered old rat became a proud coachman in full livery. Finally, the fairy godmother turned to Cinderella. She tapped her gently on the head, and in a shower of starlight, Cinderella's tattered rags dissolved, replaced by the most breathtaking ball gown imaginable. It shimmered like moonlight on water, adorned with tiny, sparkling diamonds. And on her feet appeared a pair of delicate, exquisite slippers made of pure, sparkling glass. Cinderella twirled, feeling like she was in a dream. As she prepared to climb into the carriage, her godmother gave her one final, serious warning. This magic is powerful, but it is not permanent. You must be home by the stroke of midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to the way it was. Cinderella promised she would remember, and with a heart full of gratitude and excitement, she was whisked away to the palace. When the magnificent carriage pulled up to the castle, a hush fell over the crowd. Who was this mysterious princess of such stunning beauty? As Cinderella stepped out, every eye was on her. Even her own stepmother and stepsisters didn't recognize her, merely staring in jealous wonder. The prince, who had been politely greeting guests all evening, was instantly captivated. He walked straight to Cinderella, bowed deeply, and asked for a dance. From that moment on, he had eyes for no one else. They danced and talked for hours, and Cinderella felt a joy she had never known. The prince was charming, kind, and funny, and she found herself falling for him with every passing minute. She was so lost in the moment that she nearly forgot her godmother's warning. Suddenly, the distant chime of the clock tower began to strike. 1:2:3. Midnight, panic seized her. "I must go," she exclaimed, pulling away from the bewildered prince. She fled from the ballroom, running down the grand marble staircase as fast as she could. In her haste, one of her delicate glass slippers slipped from her foot and was left behind on the steps. She didn't dare stop to retrieve it. She leaped into her carriage just as the final chime rang out and sped away into the night. Moments later, her beautiful gown was rags again, the carriage a pumpkin, and her only proof of the magical night was the single glass slipper still on her foot. The prince, heartbroken at her sudden departure, found the lost slipper on the stairs. He held it close, vowing that he would not rest until he found the beautiful maiden it belonged to. The very next day, a royal decree was issued. The prince would marry the woman whose foot fit the tiny glass slipper. The royal heralds traveled across the entire kingdom, from the grandest manors to the humblest cottages. Every young woman tried on the slipper. They squeezed, they pushed, they contorted their feet, but it was no use. The slipper would fit no one. Finally, the herald arrived at Cinderella's home. The two stepsisters, giddy with ambition, tried desperately to force their large feet into the slipper, one even trying to trim her heel to make it fit. But their efforts were futile. The herald, about to leave, sighed in frustration. Just then, Cinderella, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward and timidly asked, "May I try?" Her stepmother and stepsisters burst into cruel laughter. "You don't be ridiculous," they shrieked. But the royal herald, seeing the quiet grace in Cinderella's eyes, insisted. The prince's orders were clear. Every maiden must try. He knelt and gently held the slipper to Cinderella's foot. To everyone's astonishment, it slid on perfectly, a flawless fit. The stepmother and stepsisters stared, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. But the surprises weren't over. With a small, knowing smile, Cinderella reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the other glass slipper, placing it on her other foot. At that very moment, her fairy godmother appeared in a flash of light and, with a wave of her wand, transformed Cinderella's rags back into the magnificent ball gown. The herald gasped. The prince, who had accompanied his men, stepped into the room, his eyes lighting up with recognition and love. "It's you!" he cried, his voice filled with joy. "You are the one I've been searching for." He took Cinderella's hand, and she, with her ever-kind heart, forgave her stepmother and stepsisters for all their cruelty. The prince brought Cinderella to the palace, where they were married in a ceremony more splendid than any the kingdom had ever seen. And so, Cinderella, the girl who was once covered in cinders, became a beloved princess, and she and the prince ruled with kindness and grace, living happily ever after. Thank you so much for joining me for this classic fairy tale. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more magical tales. See you next time.